Hello, and welcome to this episode of the WARC Podcast. My name is Paul Stringer, and I'm the managing editor of Research and Insights here at WARC. Today, we're going to be talking about the future of programmatic advertising. That's the title of a new report that's out now on the WARC platform, and it covers the major trends that are shaping the programmatic landscape, including signal loss, cookie deprecation, transparency, the rise of curation, and the rise of AI-powered brand safety. Now, to discuss these trends and more, I'm really happy to be joined by Joe Root, who is CEO and co-founder of the data collaboration platform Permutive. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Paul.
Pleasure. So just before we kick off, could you just give our listeners a little bit of background on who you are and what Permutive do in the programmatic space?
Yeah, of course. So Permutive started around kind of 8 years ago. Really have a focus on how do we build a sustainable internet. So what we when we came into this space, what we really started to realize was programmatic advertising had a number of challenges going on around it. On the one hand, the economics of programmatic haven't been particularly beneficial to publishers. On the other hand, you have these challenges around consumers having a lot of choice over whether their data can be used by digital advertising companies or not, and a lot of consumers opting out. And all these things were starting to swirl together to say, hey, programmatic in its current guise isn't working. And we set out with a real mission on, hey, how do we rebuild this ecosystem in a way which respects consumers' choices around privacy, which delivers better outcomes for advertisers, where the economics add up for publishers. And it turns out with kind of a couple of tweaks to what we were doing previously, you can actually build a much more performant, better ecosystem. But that's been kind of the journey. And I suppose our focus within it has very much been on the data components and how data gets used within programmatic advertising.
Excellent. Well, you are perfectly qualified then for this conversation we're about to have on some different trends that are shaping the programmatic landscape. And I want to start, if we can, by talking about the so-called decline of open web programmatic. And I say so-called because, yes, we're seeing signs of stagnation in the open web market, and we've seen most of the growth go to the walled garden platforms over the last few years. There's obviously concerns around declining addressability, concerns around transparency, but I think perhaps it's a little too early to say we're seeing the death of the open web. I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think we would maybe frame it more as a rebirth.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the challenges which we talk about around programmatic are very true. So like I just kind of referenced, consumers have a lot of choice over whether ad tech companies can use their data. Overwhelmingly, consumers are opting out. 70% of consumers have today opted out of ID-based tracking. And you have this kind of deterministic ecosystem, which was dependent on IDs, effectively suffering from the reality that most of those have gone away. And when you remove those IDs, what ends up happening is advertisers essentially force a bid on a smaller and smaller pool of consumers. CPMs go up, CPAs go up, and performance goes down. And worse, when you measure it in your media mix modeling or when you run match market testing to look at incremental outcomes, because it's only delivering to 30% of consumers, effectively incremental outcomes are capped at 30% of outcomes. So that's kind of the challenge we have today is like effectively our ecosystem is performing with this real handicap, which is it's limited to a third of its potential. Now, when you take those handicaps away and actually run off the signals which exist within it, actually this ecosystem can outperform Facebook, can outperform Google, but the kind of current version of programmatic or kind of the version which is slowly starting to disappear and be replaced, that old version doesn't work, doesn't drive outcomes, and as a result, has stagnated.
And so when you talk about taking some of those handicaps away, is this about embracing cookieless approaches to targeting as well as alternative IDs and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I think broadly speaking, what we see in the ecosystem is we talk a lot, everyone talks about moving to this era of outcomes, right? Brands have got very tired of last click and ad tech and walled garden measured attribution and ROAS and all these funky metrics we invented in order to mark our own homework. And instead, what they're saying is, hey, we're going to measure incremental outcomes and we're going to do that in our own platforms and our own technology. Now, what that's really ushered underneath the surface has been this shift from a deterministic era to a probabilistic era. So that kind of move towards outcomes came at the same time as all this privacy regulation rolled out. And this has impacted Facebook just as badly as it impacted the open internet. When Apple released ATT and ITP and these kind of anti-tracking technologies, Facebook lost all of its third-party signal and its performance fell off a cliff face overnight. What they then did, though, was they rebuilt the entirety of their algorithms to be predictive and to run on top of their own signals and their own data. So now when I come in as an advertiser and I put my conversion data into Facebook, they're using that to make predictions on top of their own data sets on who are my next set of consumers, and then my next set of consumers, and then my next set of consumers. And they're constantly figuring out where they can drive the next set of outcomes for an advertiser. Now, on the open internet, we didn't do that, and that's the opportunity.
And so and exactly to that point, so when you talk about the opportunity, we've seen in the walled garden platforms, they've developed these AI campaign solutions where you can essentially go to the platform, say what outcome you want to drive, and the AI will do all of the heavy lifting for the campaign. Is this the same direction that you see the open internet going, but perhaps at a slightly slower pace?
Exactly. That is really what Advantage Plus is a predictive data collaboration platform. It is really a way for advertisers to bring their data, pair it with Facebook's data, use that to make predictions on who's going to buy next. And it has this AI layer which underpins it and helps to optimize and drive that. And when you do that on the open internet, and we have kind of customers who have done this to great effect, like Sky came in to use Permutive for exactly this problem. They saw that effectively open internet wasn't keeping up. They felt they could move to a predictive model, which would be more effective. And actually what they found in working with Permutive and our publishers is actually open internet signals are much more predictive of whether a consumer is going to purchase a product than the signals Facebook has to play with within its own four walls. And actually off the back of that, what they found is incremental CPAs through Permutive and our publishers were in line or better than Facebook and Google when it came to performance.
Wow. Well, and is that because of a greater kind of breadth and diversity of signal data? Is that why?
Exactly. So
right.
When you really dig into kind of these scaled open internet media companies, they have so much rich signal, whether you're researching your next holiday on Condé Nast, whether you are looking at your next tech buy with Future or Hearst, like there is so much signal which is being drummed up within the ecosystem. And also there is a reality that when you move out of long tail MFA, weird kind of open web style programmatic publishers, and you move into the premium end of the market, your inventory quality goes up, fraud goes down. Like there are all these ancillary benefits which Permutive would never would never kind of claim to be part of what we've done, but it is a side effect of companies with rich data and rich audience engagement also happen to be the ones with much better inventory and also happen to be the ones who have much less fraud and challenges.
Interesting. And I suppose a skeptic in me wonders whether this all sounds incredibly kind of promising and exciting, but do you think the supply chain and ad tech can almost like get out of its own way to build a stronger coalition, to be more integrated and seamless in and offer a kind of like the kinds of frictionless products that we're seeing the walled gardens can offer?
It's a great question. So I'm very optimistic, and I think we're seeing technologies emerge like curation, which allow for better and more effective supply side decisioning and pieces which are going to help a lot. I think ad tech is a very complex landscape of vested interest, and that makes it quite hard to change the ecosystem because there's so many interests layered on top of each other throughout it. And I think that has been the challenge, right? Is so much of the open internet is wedded to deterministic instead of predictive ways of buying. And because of that, we've seen kind of the open internet hang on to things like ID-based buying for much longer than it should have done. But I think what's really happening when you zoom out is folk who struggle in this world are moving out of open internet and into other channels and kind of diversifying their businesses away from it. And that's actually now created the space for us to go and build a much better version of this. And that space works and that space performs. And I think that will bring in a new breed of companies.
Great. And you touched on it just at the beginning of your point there around the fact that we're seeing that there are some signs or reasons to be optimistic about the future of the open web, such as the rise of sell-side curation, which is a kind of an approach that is about encouraging advertisers, encouraging the wider supply chain to prioritize and embrace quality inventory and take a little bit more kind of control and get more visibility in the kind of inventory they're buying on the open internet. So this is a neat segue really into our second trend, which is about the growth of sell-side curation. I'm wondering if, first of all, just for the benefit of our listeners, some of whom will probably be kind of new to the programmatic space or not too familiar with all the terminology that surrounds curation, how would you define curation, Joe? What kind of simple definition could you offer of what it is, particularly with respect to the fact that it's now happening more on the sell side than the buy side of the supply chain?
Yeah. So I think kind of if you look at version 1 of advertising, you have two major players in the programmatic supply chain. You have the supply side platform and then the demand side platform. And effectively the supply side platform is gathering publisher inventory and then sending it over to demand side platforms to make a decision on whether they want to buy it or not. What we saw a couple of years ago, for various reasons, was an explosion of the number of supply side platforms publishers were running. And what that meant for the demand side platforms is all of a sudden they were seeing the same publisher inventory multiple times. And effectively the number of ads they were seeing went up 10x, even though they were the exact same ads. So all of a sudden you're seeing the same ad 10 times and you can't tell it apart. What that meant was the demand side platforms went back to the SSPs and said, hey, you need to limit how many ads you send our way. And SSPs would then kind of pick the impressions they thought the DSP was going to buy on. But effectively what it meant was all of a sudden the demand side platforms just started seeing fewer and fewer ads from across the internet. And in general, those ads would be for consumers who had a cookie or an ID available. So all of a sudden the DSPs kind of lost a lot of visibility, even though they were seeing a lot of impressions sent their way. So curation has been really this amazing trend, because what it allows us to do is on the supply side to start to more actively decide which inventory and which packages should get sent over to the demand side. And that solves one layer of the problem. The second piece has been there's been this explosion of signal on the supply side as publishers start to manage their own data. All of a sudden, if I'm on Top Gear, there's all this signal about how many doors the car has, its engine size, for recipes, all the ingredients. Like there's so much data, like hundreds of thousands of contextual signals for every publisher, thousands of audience signals for every publisher. But that data was overwhelming the demand side, so they just didn't accept any of it. And curation has also moved the data decisioning sell side. So we can process and handle all that data on the sell side and then just send over to the DSP a very neatly curated package of inventory where the data has already been applied, and the DSP can just do an easier job on its end of then deciding which impressions to bid on and which ones not to.
Is it fair to say that this has really shifted some of the power in decision making towards the sell side? Because presumably as an SSP, you're much closer to the publishers. And also, if you're the ones who are kind of packaging up their inventory, analyzing their signals, and then packaging all of this up into a single ID that the DSPs then bid on, that means that it's the SSPs that have the audience insight, that have the data, and presumably that are working with the advertisers to kind of make recommendations on what kind of curated packages they should be bidding on.
Yeah. So I think kind of what we're seeing is the SSPs are effectively kind of receiving the decisions on data and then packaging up accordingly. So these SSPs have effectively created a way for data companies like Permutive to make decisions and pass those decisions into the SSP, and then the SSP will package them up and send them on. So in the old world, I would go into the trade desk and I would say, hey, I want an audience of everyone who's researching what mobile phone to buy right now. Instead, that audience is getting built with companies like Permutive and publishers on the sell side. And then on the sell side, those decisions are being passed into the SSP, who then packages them up into deal ID format, which the DSP can very comfortably bid on. So there's this huge shift in where decision making happens when it comes to data.
And do you think that's triggered a kind of a bit of an existential crisis for the DSPs, or do you think there is still a clearly defined role for those companies to play in the overall programmatic decisioning process?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of value the DSP adds outside of data decisioning. So in many ways, the DSP is acting like the ad server for the advertiser. So there is value in that. There's also a lot of financial benefits which these DSPs bring, right? They handle the way payments and cash flow through the ecosystem. And as tech companies, I think it's very easy to kind of not respect the importance or influence that has. So I think there's still very much a role for DSPs, but their role is changing and moving from what it used to be. And then I think on top of that, what you're seeing is kind of the arrival of AI really resets kind of what categories exist in the ecosystem and how ads get bought over the next 4 to 5 years.
Interesting. And when I was doing research for this particular trend, one thing I found very curious was there seems to be a lot of excitement and enthusiasm among marketers around curation. Lots of I think more than 90% of European marketers are now directing at least some of their spend via curation platforms. But curiously, and this was based on some research you did, you found that less than 15% of the 150 publishers you spoke to had tested curated marketplaces. So on the one hand, huge excitement and enthusiasm among advertisers and marketers, but on the other hand, publishers may be a bit skeptical or the adoption quite a bit slower than on the buy side. And I'd love if you could just unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, so I think there is a kind of dirty secret around curation which doesn't get spoken about as openly, which is a couple of years ago, the ANA released this report, right, on supply path optimization. Effectively, all these ad tech companies in between taking a cut of media, and off the back of that, a couple of cents on the dollar are getting sent through to the publisher. I think it's like 30 or 40 cents. That report effectively triggered this move across agencies to build more direct pathways to publishers. And what kind of the common solution which everyone arrived on was, hey, deal IDs are going to be that. So programmatic private marketplace deals are going to be how we get more direct relationships with publishers. So everyone started to measure, hey, what percentage of my media spend is going into PMPs? And that's how I'm going to report back to advertisers on, we've got a cleaner supply path. The challenge is being actually the first wave of a lot of curation companies. And the way curation works today is the publisher will send their impressions into the open marketplace, and then curation allows those to be repackaged and put into deal ID. And that allowed a load of curation companies to come into the space to take open marketplace publisher inventory, bundle it up into deal ID, and then go to the agency who thinks that this deal ID is a more direct pathway and sell on that. And that's meant that we've seen like the emergence of all these curation companies who have no relationship with the publisher whatsoever, curating their inventory, positioning it as more direct and cleaner, and then capturing advertiser dollars off the back of that. And that's why publishers say, hey, we don't really do anything in curation, because they don't. And they have very little control over what happens there. So curation has these two pieces. I think in its first version, it's been very opaque and has actually kind of allowed a lot of bad practice to emerge. But the promise of curation is supply side decisioning, which puts power back in the hands of publishers and stops their inventory from being commoditized.
And do you think we're kind of in the middle of this slightly difficult transition? Because I have to say, reading some of the more I dug into curation, I think it has huge potential, but almost the way it's been implemented, it feels very familiar to all of the complaints you see around the programmatic supply chain, which is it's just added more complexity, it lacks transparency, publishers aren't getting a good deal. But it sounds like if we do get to this kind of curation 2.0, where there is where it's about really trying to empower publishers, then that is ultimately going to take us to a much better place in open internet.
Yes, I think when you have true transparency, supply side decisioning and curation will be a more direct pathway to publishers, which means fewer dollars are getting taken from them. And part two is their data is being used to make decisions, so their inventory is no longer commoditized.
And do you think the trend towards curation as well, I mean, do you think this could become a full-blown new infrastructure for programmatic trading in the future?
Yes, I really believe you kind of spoke about these existential threats. I believe two forces are really going to reshape the categories within digital advertising. One is the emergence of curation and supply side decisioning. The other is the arrival of AI and that agents will execute on buying. And that makes open internet and more direct buying much, much more scalable than it's been previously.
And just a final question around curation is one thing I noticed that's really interesting is the company called Jounce Media did a really fascinating piece of analysis looking at bid stream activity on the open internet. And what they found is that now private marketplace deals make up around 3/4 of all bidding opportunities on the open internet. And with I think, roughly a quarter or less being open auction. Now, the growth of private marketplace deals and curation are intimately linked with each other, right? Because that's how these deals are activated. Do you think with the growth of curation that ultimately will spell the end of the open auction in the future? Or do you think the open auction still has some kind of role to play in trading?
I think the open auction has a rapidly declining and will lack any real importance in the future. Like even for Permutive, when you take a step back and not even looking at data, is today buying on the open internet is an absolute schlep in the open auction. It's like full of MFA, it's full of fraud, it's full of like brand unsuitable content. It's just an absolute nightmare to buy across. And each of those problems, for every dollar you spend, you need to spend 10 cents solving the MFA problem. You need to spend 10 cents solving the fraud problem. You need to spend 10 cents solving the brand suitability problem. So just to take part in the open auction and buy across such a vast swathe of inventory comes with this huge tax. If instead you reduce down and focus on the premium internet and take the top 20 or 30 or 50 publishers in your market and buy across those, you don't need to pay a tax for MFA. You don't need to pay a tax for bot traffic and fraud. You don't need to pay a tax for brand suitability because the media companies have taken care of it themselves. All those taxes go away and your media works much harder and much better for you as a result. So yes, I'm a firm believer that open auction is a terrible thing, and that the benefit of curation is you can curate a very tight private network which you go and buy across when none of these like traditional programmatic open auction type problems exist.
The final trend I want to look at with you is this Really interesting topic of how AI is going to transform brand safety. Now, AI, as you mentioned, is kind of one of the big trends that is shaping the programmatic landscape in total. But I want to look at brand safety specifically, and there's a lot of excitement around this trend. And that's partly because traditional brand safety approaches have not only failed to protect advertisers from unsafe content, they've also led to the defunding of quality news, which often gets penalized for being seen as unsafe, even though countless studies, research shows that advertising next to hard news, next to crime stories, whatever it might be, actually has no discernible impact on brand affinity, brand preference, that kind of thing. So, Joe, I'm curious where you stand on all of this and what's your view on traditional brand safety and some of its shortcomings?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, brand safety has been a very blunt instrument against this problem of I can buy across millions of websites on the open internet and I have no idea where I'm going to show up against. So, if I have a tool which is, in a way, I am optimizing for a world of minimizing false positives. So in that sense, like you want this very over the top tool and technology to protect you in all situations. And the problem is kind of that tool and that technology as a result has been very, very overcritical of news content and has effectively blocked advertisers from spending any money on it. Now, coming back to that Sky example we had at the top of this, what we found actually is Sky used Permutive to effectively curate across the top 20 publishers in the UK ecosystem. The majority of those are news publishers. So we're talking about like News UK, who own The Sun and The Times. We're talking about Evening Standard and Independent, the Daily Mail, the Guardian. And what they found is that by buying across those publishers and those signals, they were outperforming Facebook and Google on almost all their marketing type strategies. Now, if they had applied the same brand safety technology they were using previously to do that, they would have been blocked from buying most of that inventory. So what you find is when you remove a lot of these brand safety tools and do it in overall safe environments, your performance goes up massively. So really kind of brand safety has, again, impeded outcomes on the open internet.
And I mentioned there's a lot of excitement around AI in the context of brand safety, and that's because these kind of new AI tools really excel at analyzing both content and context at scale and with far more precision than traditional tools. So a few months ago, we published a report on the future of measurement. And one of the trends in there was looking at how AI is transforming advertisers' ability to analyze creative in campaigns. And I think AI is able to do kind of similar things by looking at the content of an advertising environment and the context in which an advertisement is appearing to offer far more granular recommendations to advertisers on whether they need to kind of adjust their brand safety approach. We've seen companies like Scope 3 launch new solutions in this area. So their product uses AI agents, which can actually be trained on brand data like brand guidelines, values, audiences to offer really bespoke recommendations and optimizations. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, Joe. Do you think AI really has the potential to kind of revolutionize how we think and manage brand safety in the future?
Yes, great question. So I think there are two visions of where the world moves to. I think kind of vision number one is that actually we move to a more direct way of buying. So AI agents, effectively, you can now have AI buying agents who interface with the sell side. And in that world, you have a buying agent who is effectively going to a publisher saying, here are my outcomes. Here's what I want to drive. Here's everything you need to know. Go and run this campaign in your ad server and using your own data and your own decisioning. And that is effectively all the benefits of direct sold can be harnessed by the fact that it's very hard as an agency to work with that. But now you have buying agents and effectively you can engage with hundreds or even thousands of publishers in a direct manner. And in that world, actually, a lot of the decisioning on brand safety would then sit with the publisher. And I'm a big believer in that world. I think like one of the great promises of AI is the open internet. It's been too hard to go and work with 50 or 60 publishers. That disappears with buying agents. Now your agent can interface with all those publishers, can work with them to optimize, do all the things you did historically. Publishers have very good brand safety categorization themselves. Their journalists, their editorial teams are writing those themselves. And then they have a second layer of AI which comes in and adapts and makes that even better. So I think there's one argument to be made that actually this is a publisher-owned technology, and AI as a buying agent allows the publisher to do more of this themselves. And I think that's what most publishers want. Their frustration with the brand safety companies has been, there's some company who doesn't understand my content or my audience telling an advertiser what it is. So I'm a big believer in that vision and that model. And a lot of our strategy is built against this notion that buying agents will effectively be the ones who orchestrate more direct relationships. There's the other piece, which is much more like brand safety 2.0, which is basically saying, hey, the first version of brand safety was very crude with keywords. And the next version of brand safety can use AI to understand context and content and your own preferences as a brand. And we're going to still do it on the demand side, but it's going to be done by a smarter, better technology. That's one model. I think the question is like, do we move to a more direct model of buying with AI? Or do we effectively keep on doing programmatic, but programmatic a little bit better because AI is helping to make better decisions?
Interesting. Yeah. So the kind of two visions. And I suppose what you might find is that both those visions come to reality, with some advertisers still relying on like third-party tools to evaluate brand safety. But we also have a much kind of more strongly publisher-led approach to brand safety, with buying agents being the interface there as well.
I think brand safety is such an open web problem and old school open auction problem. And it just becomes much, much less of a problem when you move to curated world where you're buying across the top 20 publishers in your market. The problem goes away. So like, yes, I do believe brand safety is an important problem, but it's mainly a problem of open auction. It's not a problem when you're buying with publishers who you know and who are quality and who have strong audience reputations. And that's where I like this model of brand suitability over brand safety. Is like, yes, like if I, as an advertiser, care about trust, the BBC is brand suitable. And yeah, so I suppose in that world, I think brand safety has been a big problem, but I believe the real solution is to know your publisher partners and stop buying across open auction. I think AI is a smaller problem, or the problem becomes much smaller when you do that, and AI is a neat solve to it, but like, how big is the problem?
I think that's a really good point, because really some of the reason why marketers are so excited around curation is it not only does it, give you access to more premium inventory, but the whole point of premium inventory is that it's brand safe too, right? I mean, so if you are being more choiceful and thoughtful in the kind of inventory you're buying, then by virtue of the fact you're thinking about those things, you're also buying more brand safe inventory. So it kind of takes us full circle back to this point around curation. And actually, curation is a route to far more brand safe media.
Yes.
Great. And just to wrap up and before we end, any other final thoughts from you, Joe, on how you think programmatic advertising might evolve in the future? Anything that you wanted to mention that we've not covered so far in our conversation?
No, I think we covered a lot here.
We have.
I'm very excited about where programmatic is heading. I think, this collision of supply side decisioning and AI and how it changed buying means that, like I said at the top, I don't think we're going through a death. I think we're going through a rebirth, and it's an incredibly exciting time.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's a great place to end. And just for our listeners, a reminder that the latest Future of Programmatic report, which Joe has contributed to, actually is live on the WARC site. So please do go check that out if you want to read more on the topics that we've discussed today. But that's it for this episode of the WARC Podcast. If you like what you've heard, please do follow us on your favourite podcasting platform. And if you really liked it, leave us a review. Until next time, thanks for listening.